So you're thinking about driving a car in the city center of Amsterdam? Well, don't. But if you must, know that there are a few tips and tricks that you should know before you drive a car in, through, or around the city center of Amsterdam. Amsterdam is a city that is not designed for cars, and so if you do decide to drive a car through or around the city center of Amsterdam, there's a few tips and tricks that you should know. So today in this video, I want to dive into those tips and tricks for you to know to be successful driving in, around, or through the city center of Amsterdam. I'm Carleem, an American expat who's lived in Amsterdam for the past 6 years, and this is what you need to know about driving in Amsterdam. So let's dive right into it. If there's only one thing you remember when you're driving a car around the city of Amsterdam, is that you are the lowest on the totem pole when it comes to priority order. That means it's pedestrians, bicyclists, public transportation, trams, buses, then drivers. And if you remember that one thing, if you're constantly paying attention to the fact that you're the lowest on the totem pole, you're looking out for cyclists, pedestrians, trams, buses, everywhere you go, even when there's not a pedestrian crossing or a cycle path, that's really key to driving successfully around the city. And that's something that I found to be a useful tactic. Pay extra attention to your surroundings. Constantly check your mirrors, left, right, your rear view mirror. Anytime you're moving in any direction, always look in that right mirror to see if there's any cyclists that might be in your path. Always look for pedestrians crossing, even if there's no pedestrian crossing. As you can see, I'm turning left here. I'm looking out for cyclists, looking out for pedestrians in all directions. And now I'm on one of these canal streets, and you should probably never drive here. Honestly, I don't. I wouldn't recommend it. Nobody should, but it's still possible, believe it or not. These are very narrow. There's often a lot of cyclists, pedestrians. Now, yesterday was King's Day here, so there's a lot of cleanup that still needs to be done, but don't worry, the city will take care of it. It doesn't normally look like this. So when it comes to that priority order, of course, pedestrians are at the top, and the city of Amsterdam has a lot of pedestrians, especially with a lot of tourists, as you can see around me right now. The thing to know about pedestrians is it's not just critical in the zebra crossings where pedestrians absolutely have the right of way and you must stop and yield to them. But it's also important to always look out for pedestrians, even in the normal roadway where they may be crossing at any given time. It's important to look out for them at any given time because the roads are narrow and they're not always paying full attention, and they are entitled to cross at any spot, not just the zebra crossings. And even if a pedestrian is crossing the street and there's no zebra crossing, you must yield to them. They always have the right of way. If you hit them, you will be wrong. So that's critically important. A helpful tip as a driver is just make eye contact with the pedestrians and give them a signal as to when it's safe to go. Even though they have the right of way, even though you must stop for them, sometimes they're not sure, especially if they're tourists from another area. So just pay extra attention and always stop to pedestrians, especially if they're already in the crossing. Look around, make sure no one's running through, and it's safe to proceed. Amsterdam city streets were never designed for cars, and these streets are from the days of pedestrians, bicycles, horse-drawn carriages. Big modern cars don't fit very well, and honestly, just because of the limited space for me, especially as a pedestrian and also as a cyclist, I appreciate when cars can give extra space and pay extra attention to pedestrians and cyclists in these narrow streets. Something that's especially important, and it should go without saying, you should know this as you're driving around any European city, but especially in Amsterdam, is the right-of-way priority. And that means cyclists and cars coming from the right of you have priority. So this is especially important in areas like here where there are no yield signs or shark teeth, and you have to look for any cyclists or cars coming from the right. And if there is something coming from the right, they have priority to you. This is a pretty universal rule, but in other cases, there are yield signs or shark's teeth, as we call them, and sometimes that right before left rule doesn't apply. So you need to also pay attention to that. Paying extra attention to pedestrians and cyclists is always especially important, especially when you're turning right, like I'm doing right now. You see, as I'm turning right, I'm crossing over both pedestrians and cyclists. And the trick is when you're turning right, always do the over-the-shoulder look. Always look for cyclists and anticipate if it's clear for you to turn right, because cyclists have priority, especially as you're crossing a bike path. And you see here again, I'm crossing the bike path. I'm looking around, making sure that there's no cyclists that are going to be in the way when I proceed. When it comes to cyclists, they move silently and they move quick. And it's important to note that you should always be looking out for cyclists. Generally speaking, red asphalt indicates that it's a bicycle lane, and you should never be driving on a bicycle lane. However, what you see right here is a special unique zone that you should be aware of. This is actually a cycle path, but it's called an auto te gast, which means cars are guests. You can see the markings in the road and you can see the signage. This is actually a bicycle street that cars happen to be allowed on. So what that means is cars are guests, and as a driver, you need to be yielding to cyclists, as cyclists technically have priority on this road. You need to pay extra attention to cyclists on this road and be extra accommodating to them. As you can see here, I shouldn't be trying to pass them. They're entitled to take up the entire road here, and I am just a guest. Now, right now it's a Sunday morning. This road isn't too busy, but sometimes, especially during rush hour, this road can be particularly busy with cyclists. And as a car, you should just be taking your time, proceed with caution, not rushing the cyclists, giving them plenty of space, and proceeding with extra caution as you drive through this type of road. In any other context, the red asphalt is always a cycle lane, and you should remember this as both a pedestrian and a driver. Look out for red cycle lanes. You should never drive in them. Always anticipate that cyclists are coming. Look both ways. Even if it's a one-direction cycle path, you should always be looking in both directions. So next in the priority pecking order, let's talk about trams and public transportation. As you can see, the road I'm on now has a dedicated tram line, which is also used by police or emergency vehicles or even buses, but it's mainly used by trams. You should never really drive in those lanes. They're dedicated tram lanes, bus lines. They are clearly marked, and they're not for private vehicle use. Trams are very important around the city of Amsterdam as they're moving a lot of people and they're very efficient, and it's important to not get in their way as a driver. However, sometimes there are times where the roadway is shared with trams and private vehicles, and you're driving on a road that is both a roadway and a tramway. But sometimes you have to make a left turn that crosses over the tram tracks. So even though trams have dedicated signals, as you can see here, anytime you're turning left across tram tracks, you should always be checking your left mirror before you proceed. That's because you should be yielding to trams that could be coming up behind you, and they're usually going to be on your left side as you cross over tram tracks. On smaller roads like the one you see here, you see that the road goes from a normal road and then it cuts over into the tram tracks. So here I need to pay attention and look to the left before I proceed onto the tram tracks, which are now shared with the roadway. This happens quite frequently on roads like this in Amsterdam, where you go onto the tram tracks and share the road and then have a dedicated split for just cars. You need to pay extra attention to trams. Now, when you're sharing the road like this, the tram is basically just another car. But in areas where you're crossing over the tram tracks, you should always be checking your left mirror to make sure that you're not going to be impeding the flow of the tram. Tram drivers will get really pissed off, and I've seen a couple instances as I've lived here where trams and cars have gotten into accidents, and nobody wants that. So here's another example where I'm sharing the roadway with the tram. It splits off to the side here for the tram stop. So now I have my dedicated roadway, but then as I approach, you see the warning on the ground, look out for the tram. I should check my left mirror, look over the shoulder, make sure no trams are coming, and then proceed with caution. It's pretty easy to spot a tram. It's not as difficult as a pedestrian or a cyclist, so that definitely helps, but it's still something to pay extra attention to as you're driving around Amsterdam. Here's a good example where I'm making a left turn and I want to make sure that I'm crossing over cautiously but not blocking the tram lane. And you see pedestrians are also crossing here. So quite a few things to pay attention to there. Making the left turn, not blocking the tram lane, not hitting a pedestrian here. Now, as I approach this roundabout, this is an interesting roundabout where the yield priority changes throughout the roundabout. So here's an example where I have priority. Other cars coming from that direction have to yield to me. But then as I make my way around the roundabout, there's a different yield priority to the left, and then I have priority here going straight. Of course, there's pedestrians that have the priority there. So you have to constantly be scanning the priority and yield signs as you're driving around the city of Amsterdam to really pay attention to what you need to be yielding to, who needs to be yielding to you, and even if they're not yielding to you, you need to be prepared either way. So I'm constantly going through all of these scenarios as I'm driving through to pay extra attention and know what my next move is going to be and proceeding with caution. That's the most important thing. So as you can probably tell, Amsterdam is not exactly a car-friendly city. It's not the easiest to drive around here, but it is possible with a few tips and tricks. If you absolutely must drive around the city center of Amsterdam, please follow these tips and tricks. Know that driving and cars are the lowest in the priority order when it comes to using the roads and spaces around the city. Pay extra attention to your surroundings, pay extra attention to cyclists, pedestrians, and especially trams, and take your time and be a respectful driver. Thanks so much for watching. Please leave a comment below if you have any other tips and tricks about driving around the city of Amsterdam or any other city that's similar to this where cars are not prioritized in the city. Thanks so much for watching.